Welcome back. Our next guests are a father and son duo from Wicklow who crossed the Middle East over 22 days, just months after the Hamas attack and the subsequent Israeli retaliation.
Their 3,500-kilometre road trip through Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Israel and Palestine is now the subject of a new book, Desert Bonds. Authors Dermot and Dennis Dwyer are with us now. Thank you both so much for joining us on the show this morning. Dermot, I have to ask you first, what in the name of God possessed you to do a trip like this? At the time, it was so dangerous.
Not alone at the time, but at my age.
Yeah, but for any, like it's
I suppose
scary.
it was prompted, Elaine, from recently. Michael Palin had been over in the same area in Iraq. Mm-hmm. And he hadn't been able to get to Syria, and I've always liked Michael Palin's stuff. Yeah. But I'd been in Syria 30 years before, earlier, just after the Norwegian Accords peace deal on a small assignment. My partner was supposed to go, my business partner at the time, and he jumped out and I had to go. And I always said I'd go back. So 30 years later, we went back.
OK. So when did you get roped into this?
Probably about a year before we were supposed to leave. And it sounded wonderful. We both have a shared interest in history and culture and politics. And, you know, a great opportunity for us to travel together. And then, of course, the October 7th attacks happened. And, you know, it seemed like we wouldn't be able to go. A few days before we were due to leave, the Iranian embassy in Damascus was bombed and the skies over the Middle East were closed to commercial flights. But Dad's a stubborn man, and a few hours before we were due to leave, the skies reopened and we were able to go. So off we went.
OK. So you're a determined man, as we've just heard.
Yes.
But what about the people who are going to stay back home, who are going to be monitoring your situation from afar? How did they feel about you going on this trip?
Well, my wife Helen said, "Well, if you feel like doing it, off you go." But she's a former school teacher, and you know the way they can say something which kind of means the opposite. But they were happy. She was happy about it. I think Dennis really didn't believe it would happen, and probably I didn't either, because we did it in a couple of slices. We got the permission to go to Syria. And that was in October or before the attacks. And we got that permission, and then we kind of backfilled and forward-filled after that bit. That was the bit that needed to be organised, and we went with the same company, fixers that Michael Palin used, called Untamed Borders. Yeah.
Okay. You first went to Lebanon, I believe, wasn't it? Was that your first port?
The first was to Lebanon and to Beirut.
Yeah, Beirut it's been, I'd say, 20 years since I've been in Beirut, in a time of relative peace there. I remember I was staying across from where Rafi Hariri was assassinated, but it was still quite OK. But now Lebanon would be a completely different kettle. There's huge tension there. How did you find it?
We were anxious going into Beirut. But Beirut,
it's beautiful.
It's beautiful. It really is beautiful, and it was untouched, basically untouched. Other than the harbour area, which had that big ammonia explosion, and the city had been rebuilt. Everything was working. The shopping centres were all open. There's a shopping centre there called the ABC, which is better than the Dundrum shopping centre. It was full.
Right. But I suppose, look, as you know, it's a city and a country of great contrasts, Beirut and Lebanon, you know, and there's enormous wealth, there's incredibly beautifully designed buildings, but there's also districts of the city which are terribly impoverished with Palestinian, Syrian refugees living in very difficult circumstances. So we saw a slice. On the other hand, you know, it gave us great heart to see 18 religions living there, coexisting and finding a way to get along to a certain extent.
OK. Whatever about the planning, if a corn pops up on your foot, that can have consequences too. Tell us about that.
Certainly can, and at my age, corns do pop up.
Especially when you're planning to walk.
When you're planning to walk, so I asked in the hotel, could they get me a chiropodist? They didn't know what a chiropodist was. But anyway, I got an appointment for the following day at 11 o'clock. And the taxi driver took me, and it was 1 kilometre, 2 kilometres, 3 kilometres, 4, 5, going south into South Beirut, into the heart of Hezbollah
territory.
So the man that fixed me in South Beirut was obviously Hezbollah, And when I went into his kind of studio, if you like, or what was playing? The Fields of Athenry.
You're joking me.
I'm not joking. No.
The Fields of Athenry in South Beirut.
In South Beirut, yeah.
Oh my God.
And another taxi driver, which we got subsequently, said, "Where are you from?" We said, "We're from Ireland." And he said, "Me Hezbollah, you Sinn Féin."
Right. The Lebanese do
yeah.
have, I suppose they do have quite an association and affiliation with the Irish people as well. But after Lebanon, you went to Syria, and I suppose that was the one you really wanted to return to.
Yeah.
Can I ask you what your first impressions of Syria were?
I mean, the first impressions are you're assaulted with images of the dictator Bashar al-Assad.
Before you fell, of course, you were there.
Exactly. And you drive past all of the billboards and the cult of personality. But when you get in and you meet people in different places, you're just struck by what a diverse place it is, with a number of faiths living side by side. You've got, we went to a barber's and I had my hair cut by young men listening to Eminem, and then we went back to the hotel and there was about 50 people watching Real Madrid against Barcelona and cheering, and, a couple of ladies beside us bought us tea and chocolates, and like the friendliness and welcome was staggering. Yeah. So we really
people were living, or
people were living, and I think that's the one thing that we found right throughout the trip. Life goes on. People want to get up in the morning. They want their kids to go to school. They want to know that they can have something to put on their table. And right through Syria, the welcome we received was phenomenal. I mean, they hadn't seen any tourists for perhaps 13 years.
Yeah, when you got to Jordan, though, you had a bit of a hitch, to put it mildly, really. Tell us about that.
In Jordan, well, we arrived and we had a guide called Amer who was just so funny, irreverent and knowledgeable. We went to Petra, which was, as Dad said, we fancied ourselves like Indiana Jones.
Did you go in on horses? Or did you come out on horses?
Dad bought a whip for the occasion. But it was it was absolutely extraordinary. We went to the Dead Sea and I dived in, missing the sea from Wicklow, and hadn't thought to myself, it's 8 times saltier than the average
float, you don't really go,
My eyes were stinging like I've been pepper sprayed. And then afterwards I asked our guide Amer, are there any fish or plants in the Dead Sea?
Yeah.
And he said, no, Dennis, that's why they call it the Dead Sea.
Yeah.
but as we were coming from on our way into Israel from Jordan, he showed us up in the mountains. That was the desert that Moses led the Israelis for 40 years. And my only comment was, it looked damn small, and I wondered where the GPS was, because they certainly were wandering around for 14
maps.
We went to the top of Mount Nebo, which is where Moses and his followers first saw the Promised Land, and that was a spine-tingling moment. And of course, Moses, as you know, the 3 major faiths, Islam, Christianity and Judaism, all stemmed from that. So it was wonderful to see something that was shared amongst all and influenced everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, so going into Israel.
Yes.
Was that an easy transition?
No. We had permission. I got in fairly fast. On our way in, we saw hundreds of trucks held up at the border. They were obviously being deliberately held up, and these would have been 8 trucks to go to Gaza. They let me through fairly fast. We had permission to go, but they'd held Dennis for about 3 hours. He was of an age, and they checked his social media and everything else before they let him in.
That must have been pretty frightening.
I wasn't sure if we were going to be allowed to go through, look, you can understand they need to be rigorous, and I think they'd particularly seen the Syrian stamp on the passport and wanted to investigate further.
Yeah.
But we went into Syria, and I think we'd probably both say it challenged a lot of our preconceptions. Yeah. We met a lot of people who were very broad-minded. We had a Palestinian guide called Ibrahim who'd gone to the trouble of learning Hebrew so he could communicate better with his neighbours. Moshe, Dad's friend, who they worked together in tourism in the 1980s, he and his wife Tirza had financed the restoration of a Muslim shrine at a hospital in Ashkelon.
We're looking at them there.
And I think, and, there were many instances of cross-community collaboration that surprised us and gave us great hope and optimism.
Gaza is one that, of course, is hugely on the news every day for very, very tragic reasons.
Yeah.
How did you find that there?
We went down to visit the hospital in Ashdod, which is on the border with Gaza. It's a 600-bed hospital, a public hospital. It used to be twinned, same as the Mater and Vincent's were kind of twinned across the Liffey. It used to be twinned with the Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza. Two-thirds of the staff in the hospital in Ashdod are actually Palestinian. And we were with Dr. Ron Lobel and his wife, Judith, and he's the head of emergency medicine there. They live on the border with Gaza. The actual the wall between themselves and Gaza is about 200 metres at the bottom of the garden. And when we were there, we could hear, you know, rockets and rifle shots, and it was a bit like living near an airport. Nobody kind of passed.
Wow. Just on that, we were there's a peace wall built between the border of Gaza and their house to protect from attacks. And on that wall, there's the children in the locality have left lots of little fragments, mosaics saying things like love, laughter, peace. And this, our host gave us this, which is one of the pieces that are broken off, which are little doves that children have put on that wall. And, you know, let's hope there's better days ahead for children on all sides.
Well, let's hope so, because they are always the victims when conflict occurs.
And we just stopped in Ashdod on the seafront after being there for lunch. It's a seafront, a bit like Bray. Yeah. All the restaurants were full. Kids were learning how to sail. McDonald's was full. And this was 7 kilometres away from the border.
I know, it's frightening. It is frightening.
I could talk to you all day because the experiences you've had are absolutely fascinating. Of course, a reminder, you can pick up a copy of Dermot and Dennis's book, Desert Bonds, from any good bookshop today. It's well worth the read. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
Okay. And thank you. Not just the places you visited, but the bond that developed between the two.
We're very lucky to be able to
just incredible. Thank you.
Now, after the break, we've got some Guinness stew brewing in the kitchen. Lucky us. How can we make it, though? We'll find out in a minute.